The first golden rays of the sun began to illuminate Atlanta's vibrant skyline, painting the towering glass buildings with hues of orange and gold. Aaliyah Thompson's alarm buzzed sharply at 6:30 a.m., cutting through the quiet serenity of her downtown apartment. She instinctively reached for it, silencing the sound before stretching in bed. Though court wasn't scheduled until 9 a.m., Aaliyah's years as a seasoned federal prosecutor had taught her the invaluable lesson of preparation. Her apartment was a reflection of her disciplined, meticulous nature. The modest yet elegant decor boasted clean lines and thoughtful organization. On her home office desk, case files lay neatly stacked, each one labeled and arranged in a way that hinted at the mind of someone who never left anything to chance. Even her attire for court, a reflection of her professionalism, was always selected and pressed the night before. But today was different. Aaliyah wasn't heading to the Grand Federal Courthouse where she was accustomed to commanding respect as an assistant United States attorney. Today's mission was far simpler. A quick trip to municipal court to challenge a parking ticket she believed had been unjustly issued. Standing before her bathroom mirror, Aaliyah regarded her reflection. At 35, she exuded an air of quiet determination. Her dark brown eyes, framed by neatly arched brows, mirrored the resolve that had propelled her to graduate at the top of her class from Howard Law School and secure her prestigious position at the U.S. Attorney's Office. She adjusted her navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, paired with tailored black pants. Today, her look was more casual but still polished. Carefully, she pinned back her natural hair, a choice she had embraced after years of straightening it to meet unwritten societal expectations. A hint of pride flickered across her face as she admired the way her coils framed her head like a crown. With one final glance, she grabbed a banana and her travel mug filled with freshly brewed coffee before heading out. In the parking garage, her new Mercedes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a recent indulgence she had allowed herself after winning a high-profile corruption case. The car, a sleek testament to her hard work, often drew lingering glances. It was as though people couldn't reconcile the image of a young black woman stepping out of such an expensive vehicle with their preconceived notions. By 7 a.m., Aaliyah was navigating the city's infamous morning traffic. NPR played softly in the background as she sipped her coffee and mentally reviewed her evidence for the parking ticket dispute. She had photographs and documentation ready to argue her case. The signs in the parking area were contradictory, and she was determined to prove it. At precisely 8:15 a.m., her car's Bluetooth system chimed with an incoming call. The display flashed the name of her boss, the U.S. Attorney himself. Direct calls from him were rare, and they usually signaled something urgent. "Aaliyah, I apologize for the early call." His voice came through, firm but laced with a hint of urgency. "We've got a situation with the Thompson trafficking case. The defense just filed a last-minute motion, and it could jeopardize the prosecution. I need your analysis on this immediately." Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. The Thompson case wasn't just any case. It was one of the largest human trafficking prosecutions in Georgia's history. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her mind already racing. "Of course, sir," she replied, her tone professional and steady. "What's the timeline?" "The judge has given us until noon to respond. I'm sending the documents to your email now. Review them and get back to me as soon as possible." "Yes, sir," Aaliyah assured him. As the call ended, her carefully planned morning unraveled. She glanced at the clock. It was 8:20 a.m., and she had planned to arrive at the municipal court by 8:30 to ensure everything went smoothly. Now, she had to find somewhere to park and dive into this new motion. Spotting a small coffee shop along the route, she quickly pulled into its parking lot. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she retrieved her laptop and connected it to her phone's hotspot. The defense's motion was detailed and dense, filled with complex legal arguments meant to stall or undermine the prosecution. Aaliyah's sharp mind sprang into action, dissecting the document and taking meticulous notes. Time seemed to slip away as she worked. When she finally glanced at her watch, her stomach dropped. It was 8:50 a.m. Municipal court was still 10 minutes away, and finding parking would be another challenge altogether. Quickly, she called her boss back to relay her initial analysis. Despite the time crunch, her findings were thorough, and he thanked her for her swift response. promising to provide more detailed feedback later. She ended the call and rejoined the sluggish downtown traffic. The clock struck 9:10 a.m. as Aaliyah finally pulled into the municipal court's parking lot. Grabbing her documents, she hurried toward the courthouse steps, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her phone buzzed in her bag, a message from her boss. "Great work, Aaliyah. Your analysis was exactly what we needed." Despite the chaotic morning, Aaliyah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. At least the delay had been worth it. She didn't yet realize, however, that her slightly late arrival was about to set off a chain of events that would challenge her deeply held beliefs about the justice system she had devoted her life to serving. Judge Elias Porter's courtroom awaited her, and this seemingly ordinary morning was about to become anything but routine. The municipal court buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy. People shuffled on the wooden benches, clutching paperwork for their minor violations, parking tickets, traffic infractions, and small disputes. The air was filled with a low hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional sharp knock of a gavel echoing from nearby courtrooms. Judge Elias Porter sat elevated on the bench, surveying his courtroom like a general inspecting his troops. At 62, with his graying hair neatly combed and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, he carried an air of authority forged over 3 decades on the bench. His black robe was impeccably pressed, his desk meticulously arranged. For Judge Porter, order and punctuality were paramount. He prided himself on running his courtroom with military precision, and any deviation from his rules was met with stern reprimand. "All rise," the bailiff announced at precisely 9 a.m. The courtroom rose as Judge Porter entered, his movements deliberate and commanding. He took his seat and scanned the room, his gaze briefly resting on the early arrivals. Most were dressed in business attire, paperwork neatly organized. Their punctuality earned a slight nod of approval from the judge. The first few cases were handled swiftly, each defendant stepping forward, presenting their case, and exiting with a decision. The efficiency was almost mechanical, with Judge Porter maintaining an air of cold professionalism. At 9:15 a.m., the quiet order of the courtroom was interrupted. The heavy doors creaked open, and Aaliyah Thompson slipped inside. She moved quickly but quietly, her posture straight, her demeanor calm. Yet, despite her best efforts not to disturb the proceedings, all eyes turned to her. Judge Porter's sharp gaze landed on Aaliyah immediately. He paused mid-sentence during the current case, his expression hardening at the sight of the late arrival. His voice, steady but cold, cut through the room like a blade. "Step forward," he commanded. Aaliyah walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Her navy blazer and confident stance reflected her professionalism, but the judge's disapproving glare seemed to dismiss all of that. "You must be Aaliyah Thompson," Judge Porter said, emphasizing her name as if testing its weight. His tone grew sharper. "Your case was scheduled for 9 a.m. He glanced at the clock on the wall before continuing, his voice laced with disapproval. "Do you think your time is more valuable than the court's time, Miss Thompson?" Aaliyah opened her mouth to respond, but the judge wasn't finished. "In this courtroom, we operate on rules and respect," he continued, his voice growing louder. "This isn't some casual gathering where you can stroll in at your convenience. This is a court of law." The tension in the room was palpable. The other defendants shifted uncomfortably on the benches, their eyes darting between Aaliyah and the judge. A few exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the double standard in play. Aaliyah stood her ground, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression calm and composed. She had faced her share of prejudice and scrutiny throughout her career, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about her. It was about the system she had dedicated her life to upholding, now revealing its cracks in real time. "Your Honor," Aaliyah began, her tone respectful but firm, "if I may explain." "You may not," Judge Porter interrupted, cutting her off with a wave of his hand. "I've heard every excuse in the book: car trouble, traffic, personal emergencies. None of that matters here. The time was set for 9 a.m. He shuffled the papers on his desk, his movements deliberate as if to under his authority. He hadn't even glanced at Aaliyah's credentials or the evidence she had prepared for her case. Instead, his assumptions about her were written clearly on his face. From the back of the room, James Wilson, an older black man waiting for his case, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. His eyes briefly met Aaliyah's, offering a flicker of silent understanding and support. "This court will not tolerate such blatant disregard for procedure," Judge Porter declared, his voice echoing across the room. "Perhaps a fine will help you remember the importance of punctuality." Aaliyah's heart burned with frustration, but she remained composed. She could feel the weight of the room's judgment pressing down on her. Not just the judges, but the unspoken biases of the justice system itself. On the bench, Judge Porter sat with his gavel in hand, ready to deliver his ruling. He seemed oblivious to the growing discomfort in his courtroom. Several defendants had been late that morning, but none had faced this level of scrutiny. A young white woman who had arrived just after 9:10 a.m. sat quietly in the back, her tardiness unaddressed. The disparity was undeniable, and the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Defendants whispered among themselves, and even the court clerk, Mrs. Thompson, seemed uneasy as she typed the proceedings into her computer. "Your Honor," Aaliyah said again, her voice calm but unyielding, "if you would allow me a moment to present my case, I believe I can clarify my position." Judge Porter's face reddened slightly, his authority seemingly challenged by her steady composure. The gavel in his hand tapped lightly against his desk, a signal that he was about to make an example of her. The room held its breath, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. What Judge Porter didn't realize was that his next words would do more than reprimand a late arrival. They would ignite a fire that would challenge not only his authority but the very integrity of the system he upheld. Unbeknownst to everyone in the courtroom, this seemingly ordinary morning was about to spiral into something far more profound, something that would force them all to confront the deep-seated prejudices embedded in the justice system. Judge Porter leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the gavel. The room felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice sharp and cutting, "perhaps a day in contempt of court will teach you the importance of respecting this institution." The words hung heavy in the air. Aaliyah stood at the podium, her professional demeanor unwavering despite the blatant injustice unfolding before her. She took a deep breath, her mind racing, not with fear, but with determination. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. "Your Honor," she began again, her voice calm but resolute, "I am here to contest a parking ticket. I've come prepared with documentation to prove my case. My tardiness this morning was due to an urgent matter regarding a federal case I am prosecuting, one that could affect the lives of countless victims of human trafficking." Her words carried weight, cutting through the judge's cold authority. For a moment, there was silence, the courtroom hanging on her every word. Judge Porter's eyes narrowed, his authority seemingly threatened by her eloquence and confidence. "I don't appreciate being lectured in my own courtroom," he replied, his tone biting. "Regardless of your professional obligations, this court operates on punctuality and respect. You are no exception." The tension in the room grew thicker. Several people in the audience exchanged uneasy glances. Even the court clerk, Mrs. Thompson, paused her typing, her lips pressed into a thin line. From the back of the room, James Wilson, the older black man who had been watching the exchange, stood up. His voice broke the silence, steady but firm. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, stepping forward. Judge Porter glared at him, his irritation clear. "And who might you be?" "James Wilson," the man replied. "I'm here for a minor traffic violation, but I've been sitting in this courtroom long enough to see something isn't right." He gestured toward Aaliyah. "This woman came prepared. She's clearly a professional, and yet you've spent more time reprimanding her for being late than handling the actual cases in front of you." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. A few heads nodded in agreement. Judge Porter's face reddened, his grip on the gavel tightening. "This is highly inappropriate," the judge snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Wilson, or you'll find yourself held in contempt as well." But the momentum had shifted. A young woman seated near the front, one of the white defendants who had arrived late, raised her hand hesitantly. "Your Honor," she said nervously, "I was late too. I came in after 9, but you didn't say anything to me." The room went silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Judge Porter's jaw tightened, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape from the growing scrutiny. Aaliyah seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering, "it's clear that there's a disparity in how cases are being handled in this courtroom. I understand the importance of punctuality, but I also understand the importance of fairness. All I'm asking is for the same respect and consideration afforded to others." Her words were measured, but they carried a power that resonated with everyone present. Even those who had initially viewed her late arrival as disruptive now saw the situation in a new light. Judge Porter shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the authority he had so carefully cultivated slipping through his fingers. He glanced at the court clerk, who avoided his gaze, her hands hovering over the keyboard as if unsure whether to continue documenting the proceedings. Before the judge could respond, James Wilson spoke again. "Your Honor, respect goes both ways. If this court is truly a place of justice, then it should treat everyone equally, regardless of their race, profession, or how they look when they walk through those doors." The words struck a chord. The murmurs in the room grew louder, a collective acknowledgement of the truth that had been laid bare. Judge Porter raised his gavel, attempting to regain control. "Order in the court," he barked, but his voice no longer carried the same authority. Aaliyah stood silently, her presence commanding respect even in the face of prejudice. She could feel the tide turning, the collective realization that what had transpired wasn't just an isolated incident, but a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue. Finally, the judge sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice quieter now, "present your case." Aaliyah stepped forward, her confidence unwavering. She laid out her evidence, the contradictory parking signs, the photographs, the documentation that supported her claim. Her presentation was clear, concise, and irrefutable. Judge Porter had no choice but to dismiss the parking ticket, though his acknowledgement was begrudging. "The ticket is voided," he said curtly, banging his gavel. But the victory felt hollow. The real battle had been fought not over a parking ticket, but over the principles of fairness and justice. As Aaliyah gathered her things and prepared to leave, James Wilson caught her eye again, offering a small nod of respect. Around the courtroom, others watched her with a mix of admiration and reflection. Outside, the crisp morning air felt different, lighter somehow. Aaliyah paused on the courthouse steps, her mind racing. This wasn't the end of the story. The events of the morning had exposed cracks in the system she had dedicated her life to. And if there was one thing Aaliyah Thompson knew how to do, it was fight for justice. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed. A message from her boss read, "Asterisk, great work on the trafficking case. Let's discuss more this afternoon." Asterisk. Aaliyah smiled faintly, her resolve hardening. This morning had been a reminder of why she chose this path in the first place. The fight for justice wasn't just in federal courtrooms or high-profile cases. It was in the everyday moments, the small battles that revealed the larger truths. She got into her car, the engine humming to life, and drove off into the Atlanta skyline. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a call to action. The system needed change, and Aaliyah Thompson was ready to be part of that change.